Rose counted the coins for the third time that hour, as if arithmetic might multiply copper into hope. 6 coins, everything she owned in the world, arranged on the windowsill like a prayer she didn't know how to finish. Below, on Main Street, a cowboy collapsed onto the bench outside Miller's diner. His horse swayed beside him, legs trembling, breath clouding in the frozen air. Frost clung to the man's beard. His hat had fallen into the snow. Rose pulled her shawl tight and descended the stairs. January cold bit through the thin fabric, but she'd walked through worse. Behind curtains up and down the street, she knew they were watching. They always watched. The diner's door was locked. She knocked until old Miller cracked it open, flour dusting his apron. "Put his breakfast on my tab," Rose said, nodding toward the cowboy. Miller's laugh was short and sharp. "You got no tab, girl. Cash only. Always been cash only for your kind." Rose placed the 6 coins on the threshold. Every cent she had. Miller stared at them, then at her, then scooped them up without a word. She crossed to the bench. The cowboy looked up slowly, eyes dark and bloodshot. He tried to wave her off, but his hand barely lifted. Wasn't charity. Rose said, "You looked like you needed it worse." He opened his mouth to protest, but she was already walking away. Back toward McGrath's saloon, where the morning light never reached and the stairs followed like shadows. Caleb Thornton watched her go. Frost melted on his cheeks, but it wasn't from the cold. She'd just given him her last coins. And she didn't even know who he was. That changed everything. By noon, the whole town knew about Rose's foolishness. She learned this at Pritchard's general store, where conversations stopped the moment she entered. Mrs. Pritchard stood behind the counter like a judge at a bench, arms crossed over her broad chest. "Heard you threw money at some drifter this morning," Mrs. Pritchard announced, loud enough for the 3 other women browsing to hear clearly. "Girl's got no sense. Probably thought he'd pay her back in other ways." The women tittered. Rose kept her eyes on the flour sacks. 2 pounds of flour. Please. Cash only, Mr. Pritchard said from the doorway. "Your kind don't get credit here." Rose's hand tightened on her empty coin purse. She nodded once and walked out, the laughter following her into the street. Across town, in the territorial land office, a different conversation was unfolding. "Mr. Thornton." The clerk jumped to his feet so fast his chair clattered backward. "Didn't expect you back from Denver so soon." "Sir?" Caleb removed his hat, now dry and brushed clean. The papers spread across the desk showed his name on deed after deed half the valley's land. The water rights, 3 commercial buildings including McGrath's Saloon. "The woman who works at McGrath's," Caleb said quietly. "Rose." "What's her story?" The clerk leaned in eagerly, hungry to share gossip with the most powerful man in Redemption Flats. "Rose orphan train reject. Came through 3 years back. Adopted family cast her out some scandal with their son, though she claimed different. Preacher's wife tried to save her once. But some folks just belong in the mud, if you know what I mean." Caleb's jaw tightened. "I don't know what you mean." The clerk's smile faltered. "Just that she works at McGrath's, sir. That kind of work. She served drinks." "Well, yes, but then she's a server, nothing more, nothing less." Caleb gathered his hat. "And McGrath's building. I own that. Don't I?" "Yes, sir." "You own half the—" "Then her employment concerns me. Good day." Caleb walked into the cold afternoon, guilt settling heavier than his coat. She'd saved his life with her last coins, and this town, his town, the one he owned half of, treated her like trash in the street. He didn't leave Redemption Flats that day. Instead, he found a room at the boarding house and settled in to watch, to plan, to figure out how a man pays back a debt when the woman who saved him doesn't even know he owes her. That evening, Rose scrubbed her hands raw in the basin, trying to wash away the store's stares. The water turned gray with the day's grime, But shame didn't rinse clean. It never did. The envelope slipped under her door while she was drying her hands. She knew what it was before she opened it. Eviction notices had a particular weight, a particular cruel formality. McGrath's Saloon sold. New ownership effective March 1st. All current staff to vacate premises by February 15th. No references will be provided. 2 weeks. She had 2 weeks to find new work, new lodging, a new life in a town that had already decided what she was worth. Rose opened her tin savings box with shaking fingers. $23. Not enough for the California stagecoach fare that cost $40. Barely enough for winter lodging if she skipped meals. And she'd already grown too thin. She lay back on the narrow bed and let herself remember, just for a moment, the things she usually kept locked away. The orphan train at 8 years old, pressed against the window, watching her mother's face disappear into the crowd. The adoption that had seemed like salvation, a farm family, neat house, promised education, instead a servant's life, cooking, cleaning, mending from dawn until collapse. And then, at 16, the son, his hands grabbing her in the barn, his mother's cold eyes when Rose had screamed for help. Seductress, the mother had called her. Jezebel. The town had believed the family with property over the orphan with nothing. Always did. Always would. Rose blew out the lamp and lay in darkness, calculating survival the way other girls her age calculated dreams. Those 6 coins she'd given the cowboy that might have been the margin between California and another winter. Of shame. But she'd do it again. Kindness was a luxury she couldn't afford. But she kept spending it anyway. Maybe that made her a fool. Outside, in the falling snow, Caleb Thornton stood looking up at her darkened window. He'd made his decision. Tomorrow, he'd make his offer. Tonight, he'd pray she'd accept it, and that he could keep his hands and his heart to himself long enough to prove not all powerful men were predators. The snow fell heavier. He pulled his coat tight and walked back toward the boarding house, already composing the words that would either save her or insult her beyond repair. The knock came at dawn. Rose opened the door to find the cowboy standing in the hallway, except he wasn't a cowboy anymore. Clean-shaven, hair trimmed, wearing clothes that whispered money. His eyes were the same, though dark and careful and carrying something that looked like regret. Her stomach dropped. "You didn't need that breakfast." "No, ma'am, I didn't." He removed his hat. "Name's Caleb Thornton. I own the Thornton Ranch and several other properties in the territory. I came to offer you employment." Rose's face burned hot, then cold. Thornton. Everyone knew that name. He owned half the valley, had water rights that made him more powerful than the mayor, and she'd treated him like a charity case. "I don't need pity work," she said. Moving to close the door, his boot stopped it gently. "It's not pity. I need a ranch manager. Someone to handle the books, cooking, supply orders. The house has been neglected since my wife passed 2 years ago. Pays $30 a month, room and board included. $30. More than she'd make in 3 months at McGrath's, even before the eviction." "Why me?" Rose's voice came out harder than she intended. Town's full of respectable women who'd jump at this. Caleb met her eyes without flinching. "Because you fed a stranger when it cost you everything. That's the only character reference I need." Rose studied him for signs of the trap. The hidden price. The expectation that always came with a man's generosity toward a woman with her reputation. 1-month trial. She said finally, "I sleep in the bunkhouse, not the main house. I eat separately. This is employment, Mr. Thornton. Nothing else." Agreed. He held out a hand. She shook it once, briefly, and pulled back. "I can start Monday. I'll have the bunkhouse ready." He placed a contract on the hall table, crisp paper, clear terms, her name spelled correctly. "Thank you, Miss Rose. He left before she could respond. Rose picked up the contract with shaking hands and read every word 3 times, searching for the clause that would make her into what they all already believed she was. It wasn't there. Just fair terms, fair wage, and a man's signature that carried more weight than the law in this territory. She packed that afternoon, didn't tell anyone where she was going. Let them gossip and speculate and decide what it meant. She was done explaining herself to people who'd already made up their minds. As she walked out of town toward the Thornton Ranch, snow crunching under her boots, Rose allowed herself one small, dangerous thought. Maybe this time would be different. Maybe 3 weeks passed like a dream Rose was afraid to wake from. The Thornton Ranch sprawled across the valley's best grassland, 300 acres. A main house built from timber and stone. Outbuildings that had seen better days but were structurally sound. The bunkhouse was clean, warm, and blessedly private. Rose threw herself into the work with the precision of someone who knew opportunity was temporary. She alphabetized the neglected library, balanced books that hadn't been touched in months, inventoried supplies, and found the ranch was paying twice what things cost because no one had bothered to negotiate. She renegotiated, saved Caleb $200 in the first week alone. The visiting ranch hands whispered their approval. Best manager Thornton's had since his wife passed. Caleb himself was gone more often than not. Business in Denver, water rights meetings, territorial legislature consultations. When he was home, he was quiet, respectful, careful never to stand too close or stay too long. But Rose caught him watching sometimes, not with hunger, but with something harder to name. Curiosity, maybe, or the same careful hope she was trying not to feel. One evening, he found her reading by the main house fire. She'd borrowed a book from the library, Jane Eyre, worn leather cover. Someone's favorite once. "You read Bronte?" he asked from the doorway. Rose looked up, startled. "Borrowed it. I'll return it." "Keep it as long as you like." He gestured to the shelves. "My wife collected them. She'd be glad they're being read again." He started to leave, then paused. "You've done remarkable work here, Miss Rose. The books, the supply contracts, even the way you've organized the storeroom. I haven't seen the ranch this well managed in years." "Thank you, Mr. Thornton." "Caleb," he said quietly. "When it's just us, you can call me Caleb." "That wouldn't be proper." "Proper." He smiled sadly. "That word gets used to keep good people small and cruel people comfortable. But if you prefer Mr. Thornton, I'll answer to it." He left before she could respond. Rose stared at the fire, heart beating too fast, the book forgotten in her lap. The next afternoon, organizing old files, she found receipts dating back 3 years, anonymous payments toward Widow Hutchins' property taxes, signed only with CT. "Why hide it?" she asked that evening, when he returned from town. He knew immediately what she'd found. "Same reason you didn't tell anyone you were broke when you bought that breakfast. Some things are between you and God, not you and an audience." They stood in the lamplight, close enough that Rose could see gold flecks in his dark eyes, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from him after his cold ride home. He stepped back deliberately. "Good night, Miss Rose. Good night, Mr. Thornton." But something had shifted between them, fragile and frightening and real. Rose walked back to the bunkhouse through melting snow, March arriving early, and allowed herself to imagine just for a moment what it might be like to stay, not as an employee, but as something else, something she didn't have words for yet. Behind her, Caleb stood at the window, hand pressed to the cold glass, watching until her lamp lit in the bunkhouse. Then he turned to his empty house and wondered how a man was supposed to keep his heart disciplined when, every day, she proved herself extraordinary. Rose was humming. She didn't realize it until the sound surprised her, a tuneless rhythm while kneading bread dough in the ranch kitchen. The first time she'd hummed in 3 years, maybe longer. She smiled and kept working, unaware that miles away in town, the foundation was cracking beneath her feet. The Redemption Flats Town Council met every first Tuesday. This Tuesday's agenda included water rights, street maintenance, and Item 7, Community Moral Standards Ordinance. Caleb sat in the back row, half listening, reviewing water contracts in his head. He'd come because his presence carried weight. His silence could stop bad laws before they started. Mayor Pritchard stood at the podium, Mrs. Pritchard beaming from the front row like a queen at her coronation. Item 7, the mayor announced. We propose an ordinance banning individuals previously employed in establishments of ill repute from owning businesses, holding teaching positions, or maintaining church membership within town limits. Caleb's head snapped up. We're not calling names, Mrs. Pritchard added sweetly, but certain elements have been allowed to linger too long in our community. We must protect our children, our values, our reputation as a God-fearing town. They meant Rose. Everyone knew they meant Rose. Councilman Andrews cleared his throat. This seems harsh. Some of these women had no other options. Then let them find options elsewhere, Mrs. Pritchard said firmly. We cannot compromise our standards for individual sob stories. Heads turned toward Caleb. His vote would decide this. His silence or his voice would make the difference. He opened his mouth, closed it, thought about the water rights legislation he needed council support to pass, thought about his wife's grave and the promise he'd made to do good in her memory, thought about Rose's face when she'd given him those 6 coins, and said nothing. The ordinance passed 7-2. Caleb signed his name to the attendance sheet and walked out into the cold evening, shame soaking through him like rain. The next morning, Rose went to town for supplies. Mrs. Pritchard was waiting at the mercantile entrance, smile wide and venomous. Oh, Rose dear. She said it loud enough for the entire store to hear. We had the most productive council meeting yesterday. Your Mr. Thornton was there, sat quiet as a church mouse while we discussed cleaning up the town's moral decay. Even signed in support of our new ordinance. Money talks louder than gratitude, doesn't it? Rose's hands went numb. What ordinance? Oh, just that former saloon workers can't own property or attend church here anymore. Nothing that affects you. Of course, unless you were planning to stay. Mrs. Pritchard's eyes glittered. But why would you? You're just passing through. Aren't you like always? Rose finished her transaction with mechanical precision. Walked to her horse with her head high and her vision blurring. Only when she was alone on the road back to the ranch did she let the tears come. He'd sat silent, heard them call her decay, pestilence, moral rot, and said nothing. She'd been a fool to think this time was different. Powerful men were all the same. They used you when convenient and discarded you when it cost them something to stand beside you. Rose rode back to the ranch, went directly to the bunkhouse, and packed her single bag. Every movement felt distant, automatic, like watching someone else's hands perform the motions of leaving. She left the note on the kitchen table where he'd find it first thing 1 month up. Books are balanced. Supplies ordered through May. I won't be where I'm not defended. Or by the time Caleb returned at sunset, she was gone. Caleb read the note 3 times before its full weight crashed through him. I won't be where I'm not defended. 7 words that gutted him cleaner than any knife. Because she was right. He hadn't defended her. Hadn't even tried. He saddled his horse and rode straight to the cemetery where his wife lay beneath a simple stone marker. The stars were out, cold and distant, bearing witness to his confession. I had one chance, he said to the stone, to her memory, to God or whoever was listening. One chance to be the man you believed I was. And I chose politics over principle, chose approval over action. The wind stirred dead grass. Nothing answered but his own shame. She gave me her last coins, Ellen, didn't hesitate. And when they called her pestilence, I sat silent as stone. I'm no better than the men who cast her out in the first place. Worse, maybe, because I knew better and did nothing anyway. He stayed until the cold drove him back, until he'd made peace with what he had to do next. Tomorrow was Sunday. Tomorrow. He'd walk into that church and burn every bridge that needed burning. Some things were worth more than water rights. Some people were worth more than political capital. Across town, in the basement of that same church, Rose sat on a cot with her bag beside her and her savings tin open in her lap. $90 now, enough for California and a month's lodging while she found work. Enough to run. Again. A soft knock interrupted her calculations. She opened the door to find Tommy Pritchard, the preacher's 10-year-old son, holding a napkin bundle. "Brought you bread and cheese," he whispered. "Mama doesn't know." Rose's throat tightened. "Tommy, you'll get in trouble." "Don't care. You're good." "Miss Rose, you helped me when Billy Coates was going to beat me up last year. Remember you told him to pick on someone his own size?" "That's different. I'm grown." "Doesn't matter. Good is good." He pressed the bundle into her hands. "Don't let them make you think different." He scurried away before she could respond. Rose sat back down on the cot, staring at the bread, and something crystallized inside her. Running gave them victory. Running said they were right about her. Running meant every town from here to California would be the same new names, same judgment, same shame. She was tired of running, tired of being small so other people could feel big, tired of silence while people who'd never missed a meal decided her worth. Tomorrow was Sunday. Tomorrow. She'd walk into that church, not to beg forgiveness, but to stand as witness to her own humanity. Let them look away if they wanted, but she wouldn't make it easy anymore. Sunday morning arrived bright and cold. March sun glinting off melting snow. The church bells rang across Redemption Flats, calling the righteous to worship, the hypocrites to performance, and two broken people to reckoning. Rose stood outside the church doors, heart hammering against her ribs. Inside, she could hear the opening hymn ending, the shuffle of people sitting, the preacher's voice rising into sermon. "We must guard our community against moral decay," he was saying. "We must be vigilant gatekeepers of virtue, lest wickedness take root among us." Rose pushed open the doors. The sermon stopped, every head turned. Mrs. Pritchard's smile was vicious and triumphant. The pest had walked into the trap, willingly. Rose walked down the center aisle, boots echoing on worn wood, and sat in the back pew. She folded her hands in her lap and met the preacher's shocked stare without flinching. "Please," she said quietly. "Continue." The preacher's mouth opened and closed. Before he could recover, another set of boots sounded from the front of the church. Caleb Thornton stood from his customary front pew and walked to the pulpit. The preacher stepped aside automatically. Thornton money had built half this church. After all, Caleb turned to face the congregation, and Rose's breath caught. His face was set like stone, but his eyes found hers across the crowded room, and something passed between them. An apology, a promise, a question she didn't know how to answer yet. "You want to talk morals?" Caleb's voice carried to every corner. "Then let's talk about the most moral act I've witnessed in this town." Silence. Absolute and crackling with tension. 3 weeks ago, a woman with 6 coins, her last 6 coins in this world, bought breakfast for a stranger she thought was starving. She gave everything when she had nothing, while every person in this room has sat comfortable, counting blessings and congratulating yourselves on your virtue. She's been the only one actually living what you preach. Mrs. Pritchard stood. "Mr. Thornton, this is inappropriate." "What's inappropriate?" Caleb cut her off. "Is a town that calls itself Christian, while it crucifies anyone who doesn't meet your definition of respectable. What's inappropriate is me sitting silent while you called her pestilence, while you voted to ban her from the very grace you claim to worship." He turned to face Rose directly. "I failed you. I sat in that council meeting and said nothing when they attacked you. I chose political convenience over moral courage, and I'm standing here now to say I was wrong. Unforgivably wrong." Rose's vision blurred. She blinked hard, refusing to let them see her cry. Caleb turned back to the congregation. I'm offering Miss Rose a full partnership in the Thornton Ranch. Not as hired help. Not as charity, as equal partner with her name on the deed. If that offends your sensibilities, if that challenges your comfortable prejudices, then take your business elsewhere, because I've got better things to build than your approval. Rose stood slowly, legs shaking. She walked down the aisle toward him, every eye tracking her movement, whispers erupting like brush fire. She stopped beside Caleb at the front of the church, not behind him, not ahead of him, beside him, equal. I didn't ask for defense, Mr. Thornton, she said clearly, but I won't refuse truth when it's finally spoken. For a long moment, nothing moved. Then a small figure stood in the middle pews, Tommy Pritchard. Face red, but determined. Miss Rose is good, he said, voice cracking. She helped me. She's nicer than most of you. Widow Hutchins stood next, leaning on her cane. Caleb Thornton paid my taxes for 3 years and never asked thanks. If he says she's good people, I believe him. The blacksmith stood. Then the baker's wife. Then others, not everyone. Not even half. But enough. The forgotten ones who remembered small mercies. The honest ones who'd grown tired of performance. Mrs. Pritchard gathered her skirts and stormed out, dragging her scandalized husband with her. Others followed in a huff of righteousness offended, but more stayed, and in the spring light streaming through stained glass, something shifted in Redemption Flats. Not fixed, not perfect, but changed. The preacher cleared his throat. I think we'll end service early today. Seems the Lord's already done the preaching. 3 months later, June arrived on the Thornton Ranch like a promise kept. Rose knelt in the dirt beside the porch, planting wildflowers columbine, prairie aster, Indian paintbrush. Their roots would run deep. Their colors would return each spring, and they'd bloom whether anyone approved or not. Her hands were steady. Her shoulders, once permanently hunched against expected blows, had straightened. She wore a simple dress, clean and mended, and her hair was pinned back practically rather than hidden in shame. Behind her, the ranch house door opened. Caleb emerged carrying 2 plates and a coffee pot. The Sunday morning ritual they'd established without discussion. Same breakfast she'd bought him that frozen January morning. Eggs, biscuits, coffee. Every Sunday. They shared this meal on the porch. Equals. Your flowers are taking hold, Caleb observed, settling into the chair beside her. Everything takes hold if you give it good soil and patience. Rose accepted the coffee cup, their fingers brushing briefly. Neither pulled away anymore. The valley spread before them, green and gold and humming with life. The ranch thrived under their joint management, Rose's precision and Caleb's connections combining into something neither could have built alone. Her name was on the deed now. Legal partnership signed in April before witnesses. Filed with the territorial office. Rose Colton, landowner. Part of the permanent record that no gossip could erase. In town, things had shifted. Mrs. Pritchard had moved to Denver, shame-driven rather than forced, when her own son had publicly defended Rose over his mother's objections. The preacher's sermons had gentled, focusing more on mercy than judgment. New families arriving in Redemption Flats didn't inherit the old grudges, didn't know to shun the woman who managed the Thornton Ranch books and hosted monthly community meals in the ranch's great room. Not everyone accepted the change. Some still crossed the street when Rose came to town. Some still whispered, but their power had broken like ice in spring, still there, but melting, no longer solid enough to bear weight. Tommy's bringing back that book today, Rose mentioned. The one about mathematics. Says he wants to be an engineer. You're teaching him well. Caleb smiled. His mother won't thank you for it. His mother doesn't speak to me, but she doesn't stop him coming here either. That's something. They sat in companionable silence, coffee steaming, the morning sun warming their faces. A child appeared on the road, Tommy Pritchard, racing up the path with a book tucked under his arm. and a question already forming on his lips. Rose waved. Tommy waved back, grinning. "Think we've scandalized them enough for 1 year?" Rose asked quietly. Caleb considered this seriously. "I think we've just started. Wait till they find out I'm building you a library." "You're what?" "A library. Separate building, east of the house. Ordered the materials last week. Figure if you're teaching half the valley's children mathematics and literature, you'll need proper space for it." Rose stared at him. "That'll cost a fortune." "Good thing I've got a fortune." He met her eyes steadily. "And a partner who taught me what's worth spending it on." Her throat tightened with something too big for words. Gratitude, yes. But also something warmer. Something she'd been afraid to name because naming it gave it power to hurt her. "Caleb." "No expectations," he said quickly. "Just a library, for the work you're already doing. Nothing more unless you want it to be more. And if I did," her voice came out barely above a whisper, "want it to be more." He set down his coffee cup carefully. "Then we'd take it slow. We'd do it right. We'd build something solid on honest ground. Not on debt or rescue or gratitude, but on choice and respect and time. That sounds like something worth building." "I think so too." Tommy reached the porch, breathless and enthusiastic. And the moment passed into the ordinary miracle of a Sunday morning, a boy's questions about engineering, a woman's patient explanations, a man's quiet presence that had transformed from isolation to belonging. Later, after Tommy left and the dishes were washed, Rose returned to her wildflowers. Caleb brought her a glass of water and knelt beside her, helping press soil around the roots. He owned half the territory. Someone might tell the story someday. Deeds and ledgers proving dominion over dirt and grass. But she taught him what was worth holding: kindness when it costs, courage when it's easier to hide, and the solid ground you stand on when everything else falls away. The breakfast had been a bridge. The silence had nearly burned it. But the standing together, in daylight, before witnesses that had been the foundation, and on that foundation, with wildflowers taking root and summer arriving like grace, they were building something that couldn't be bought or inherited or taken by gossip. They were building home, not shelter from the storm, but the kind of home that weathers storms together and comes out stronger for it. The kind built on 6 coins and 30 pieces of silver transformed into something honest. The kind that starts with one person seeing another's humanity when everyone else has looked away. Rose's hands pressed deep into the soil, feeling the earth's coolness, its generosity. Caleb's shoulder touched hers as they worked side by side. Above them, the June sky stretched endless and blue, and for the first time in her life, Rose looked at that sky and thought not of escape, but of staying, of planting roots, of home, the end.